Okay, folks, thanks for coming down tonight. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Tonight, we got a special meeting going on, that being a liquor license review board right off the bat, right? And we're gonna go ahead and get going with that before we even get into our work session. So to do that, Krista, we'll need a roll call.
Trustee Gator.
Here.
Trustee Jerome.
Here.
Trustee Kenny.
Present.
Trustee McDonald. Trustee Whitehouse.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Knutson. Mayor Hammond.
Here. Okay, tonight, we're going to be talking about a sales room application, Old Colorado Brewery Company. Haven't talked about them in a while. Good to see you. Dan, you want to take this on? Tell us all about it?
Actually, I'll take the
You want to take this?
beginning of it.
Okay, go ahead.
Old Colorado Brewing Company has submitted an application for a sales room at 3700 West Cleveland. The sales room will allow them to provide on-premise consumption sales as well as off-premise sales in sealed containers. They have provided a control plan, which includes a physical barrier of the premise. They will also have signs displaying no alcohol beyond this point. The applicant has also provided documentation that they have permission for use of the premise through a lease agreement. The sales room is allowed under a wholesale beer license through the state of Colorado. And the local authority should approve the application unless it determines the issuance of the permit would impact traffic, noise, or other neighborhood concerns in a manner that is inconsistent with local regulations or ordinances. Staff has reviewed the application and supporting documents and would recommend approval of the sales room.
Okay.
And the applicant is also here if you have any further questions.
Brandon, you want to come up, tell us what you're doing?
Well, good to see you both. It's been a while.
Thank you.
Been a while.
Thank you.
Likewise, how are you guys?
Good.
Yeah.
It's nice to see all of you.
It's nice to be back.
Yep.
So we are subletting the space at 3700 West Cleveland, along with the barbecue Love
Barbecue
Shack
Love Shack.
that I believe you guys have already reviewed and approved. We're going to share that space, have a small bar inside, offer beer sales to go and on premise as mentioned. What questions do you have that we can answer?
How much beer you been sitting on all this time?
I wish a lot more.
At that facility, if that
Right,
answers
right.
another question. We'll be contract brewing elsewhere and bringing in beer.
Okay. Anybody got any questions you want to bring up?
I do not. Looks good to me.
No questions?
That works. Thank you guys very much.
Well, we look forward to seeing this whole thing come together. So
Glad to have you back.
yeah.
Yeah, we're excited.
Thank you.
Year and a half too long.
Okay. Well, Dan, you have anything you need to add?
I think you need to enter into the liquor licensing authority.
Oh, we already did that.
You had opened a special meeting, but you need to actually enter the
Correct.
licensing authority now, so.
I got 6:33. We are now going to enter our liquor licensing authority board. To do that, we're going to need another roll call.
Trustee Gator.
Here.
Trustee Jerome.
Here.
Trustee Kenny.
Present.
Trustee McDonald.
Here.
Trustee Whitehouse.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Knutson.
Here.
Mayor Hammond.
Okay, we had no questions, and this is not a public meeting either, but so we can just go right to a vote, put this thing to it. So why don't you go ahead and just do a vote.
Point of information,
Yeah.
since this is, would we take public comment if, and this would be a question to our attorney?
Yeah, I just didn't see it on here. so-
Yeah, I didn't know whether because of the nature of this
Because
hearing-
this is a sales room, it's sort of a special licensing that's done by the state. So you actually don't need a public hearing at this level. What you're doing is really providing a recommendation to the state on whether they should approve or disapprove of this. So no, there's no need for a public hearing on this.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay,
Make
make a motion to approve the sales room application for Old Colorado Brewing Company.
Second.
Okay.
Trustee Gator,
Yes.
trustee Jerome,
Yes.
trustee Kenny,
Yes.
trustee McDonald,
Yes.
trustee Whitehouse,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Knutson,
Yes.
Mayor Hammond.
Yes. Okay, guys. Thanks.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
All right. Good deal. That's good. Okay, 6:35, we're going to, we need a motion to adjourn out of here, don't we?
Oh, yeah. I move that we adjourn our special liquor licensing board.
Second.
Trustee Gator,
Yes.
trustee Jerome. Yes. Trustee Kenny.
Yes.
Trustee McDonald,
Yes.
trustee Whitehouse,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Knutson, Mayor Hammond.
Yes. Okay, a little rusty.
Do we need to adjourn our
We need
special
to
meeting
adjourn
too?
our Special meeting as well, because we're in a work session.
Glad you're here, brother.
Read his parliamentary book last night.
I also move that we adjourn our special meeting.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Gator,
Yes.
trustee Jerome,
Yes.
trustee Kenny,
Yes.
trustee McDonald,
Yes.
trustee Whitehouse,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Knutson,
Yes.
Mayor Hammond.
Yes. All right. Now we can open the work session. I think our first item on the list is 30% cost estimate for the water treatment plant expansion. Staff presentation. Dave, Bob, and the whole team's here. Who wants to start off?
Working on it. This is Dave Meyer. Give me a second here to figure out this interface. I have a presentation.
Can you turn Dave up a little bit?
Okay, everybody there seeing a blue-green screen slideshow? Okay, everybody hear me okay now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So again, Dave Meyer, engineer, staff engineer, been working with our team here on the water treatment plant expansion. We started back in December, and we've since got to our 30% package, which was delivered by Jacobs on schedule on March 5th, a couple months ago. We immediately sent that over to Hydro Construction, and they started working on their 30% cost estimate. And we received that number in from Hydro Construction on schedule on April 1st. The number was higher than what we were hoping for. So we immediately started a value engineering effort with us, town staff, Jacobs, and Hydro Construction to explore some options to reduce those costs. The 30% cost estimate came in at $29,421,000 or $421,610. There's an excerpt from the package we got from Hydro Construction, clipped below here, where you see the breakdown, labor expenses, the material expenses, subcontractor fees, equipment, and other. That sum up to the 29 million. By far, the highest costs are the material costs. Subcontracts are also pretty high. So with that high cost, we started, well, let me back up here. So what's some of the reasons for those high costs? We're all up against this right now. The big one is the market volatility that we're in right now due to COVID, the disasters in Texas, hurricanes, etc. All of these factors here are beyond our control. that's beyond the engineer's control, the contractor's control, and town staff. This is what we're up against, along with every other municipality that is doing any kind of major project. Many vendors are holding prices for only 24 hours. There have been extraordinary increases in material costs over the last 6 months. PVC, ductile iron pipe, concrete, lumber. Lumber's up 3 times higher. Anybody been to Home Depot or Lowe's lately? A few months ago was paying maybe $4 for a 2x4. That price is now near $8, over $8. Copper prices are up 40%. There are also long lead times on equipment, some taking up to 9 months or more. So this is what we're up against. Some of the value, all of the value engineering items that we consider to reduce the cost are listed here on this slide and also in your package, I think. So 54 items were considered. This took the team a good 4 to 6 weeks of effort. We looked at each one of these items in great detail and attached cost savings with each one of these items. Ultimately, town staff, that's DJ, myself, and Bob Gowing, approved all of these with the exception of the red highlighted ones, which I'll talk to in a second. Approved all of these, which equated to a total savings of approximately 1.5 million. Okay. We did consider, we're calling it here kind of the nuclear option, to defer the ozone treatment and also covers for the flocculation and sedimentation basin as last ditch efforts. We all know what happens if we remove the ozone treatment. We are right back to where we are right now with the taste and odor issues we're having. We do not want to do that. So we were able to keep the ozone treatment facilities in the design moving forward. So again, from a 4 to 6 week effort with the engineers, with Hydro Construction, they all did a great job, and we came up with 1.5 million in savings. So how does that equate to our finances and how to pay for this 30% cost estimate that we came in with? We talked it over very closely with our finance team, with Judi and Tyler, and prepared what you're seeing on screen right now and also in your package. I'll walk through this here. So we are looking at $28 million in our project budget for this expansion starting January 1st of this year. That's how much money we have budgeted. We subtract off the Jacobs fees that we still have to pay, 3.2 million. We subtract off a little bit money that we'll still be paying Hydro for pre-con fees. We also have some miscellaneous efforts that we'll be undertaking, the intake survey and materials testing, et cetera, during construction. Subtract all these numbers, we're down to 24.6 remaining budget for construction. We take our 30% cost estimate that came in, that was prepared by Hydro. We added 3% for a price escalation. So assuming that all the uncertainty in the market we have right now, we felt that this is a good number moving forward to tack on as to what might happen between now and the 60%. We come up with a revised construction cost estimate of $30 million. So that equates to about a $5.6 million budget shortfall. So this 5.6 is taking the remaining budget for construction, subtracting off the revised construction cost estimate. So we're still short 5.6 million. We start adding back in some savings that we found, the VE savings, value engineering savings that I just mentioned. Bob, DJ, and myself looked very, very closely at our capital improvement projects we got outlined for the next 5 years. And we found about $2 million of potential savings or deferments in those projects. We had that back on. We also stand to get some monies in from the ARA grant, assuming we'll get roughly $2 million in, and Judi and Tyler can speak to that a little bit more if there's some more questions about that. So assuming we're taking half of the 2 million that we can get in, putting it towards the wastewater plant, other potential grant monies that we're chasing, Tyler's working very hard on some DOLA grants. We could get potentially $650,000 on that. We have a remaining shortfall of $387,000. We feel that this dollar amount we could further address at the 60% cost estimate in September, and that we can continue with our design, assuming all of these VE efforts have been implemented. We gave Jacobs the go-ahead about a week or two ago to proceed with these VE efforts and incorporating them into the 60% design. So with that, we will be continuing to look at other possible grant sources, grant monies, changes to capital improvement projects over the next 6 months. We are up against a moving target with the numbers that are becoming in for the 60%, 90%, and the 100% cost estimates. We feel that we can continue, like I said, with the 60% design, incorporating these VE efforts, and keep moving forward on this project. So that's the end of the presentation. I believe I have a little bit more information in the board package. Opening it up for questions now. We're all available. I have Jacob's staff on board, and I believe Hydro might be on as well. We could have them chime in if needed. Are there any questions?
Anybody?
I did have a question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Meyer, is it Kid Bob, or is it possible at this time to discuss what the deferred capital improvement projects, obviously requiring board approval for $2 million? I mean, is there some way we can get an outline of that, or is that something a little further down the road?
Share that with you on the screen right now. Go to the podium. Give me a couple of minutes here. So we looked at the Bob Gowing, Public Works Director. We looked at the entire 5-year as it's currently planned out. And this year, what we identified for deferment, based on the fact that the water treatment plant is our #1 priority in our CAP, the improved carbon feed system. This was a system that would be in place on kind of an interim basis until the new plant is built. That was about $80,000. The distribution system improvements and oversizing, we cut in half from 100 to 50 per year on kind of an ongoing basis. The nano plant expansion, the nano plant is up and running, as is the RO. The bulk of the Wilson well improvements have already been completed, so we feel like we can defer some of the other items that we had planned. The filter media replacement out at the main plant, the Floxed plant, that was another, I think you've probably heard that most of the issues that we've had are related to these filters, and a little bit risky to forego that, but we think we can get by without it. DJ and his guys have done a great job at addressing those problems kind of as needed. The redundant nano RO pump motors for 37, That last one was 220, by the way. Disinfection byproduct rule compliance. Oops, I'm sorry, that shouldn't be read. Disregard that one. The zero turn mower for 18,000. So that would be this year's budget, and that totals about 500, close to $500,000. I'm rounding these numbers off a little bit. So over the course of the next 5 years, we've included things like the water efficiency program, and I think I mentioned that earlier. But we do want to hang on to the water efficiency program money for this year because we've already spent quite a bit of that. And a portion of it next year, the portion we'd like to hold on to next year is related to the real-time communication from the new meters. Basically the time of day information that would be available to customers if they were interested in monitoring their own water usage, but it also has leak detection. It has a lot of benefits that can be expressed in monetary value to the water utility. So that total cut from that is about 542,000. And also looked, kind of scoured through the operating budget. This year, as you know, the budget's just a one-year budget. So we have 1 year's worth of operating savings, 120,000 for sludge removal. And the front end loader, I forgot to mention that. We went ahead and deferred that. That's in the 5-year CIP. It's not shown in the current budget. But if you look at the 5-year CIP plan, you'll see it out there in year 4 or 5. So that all totals up to about $2 million. We're not real thrilled about these cuts, but as I mentioned earlier, we understand that this water treatment plant is our top priority, the town's top priority, the top priority for the whole community. So we do believe that it's possible some of these savings can come back to us during the 60% effort, which Dave might be about to talk about a little bit more. So in general, this project would proceed on to the 60% phase where Jacobs would prepare what you would think of as almost a complete set, much more so than 30% set. And we would then get another cost estimate from Hydro for that. And depending on how that comes in, we would have the option of additional VE items or those kind of nuclear options that Dave mentioned earlier. All of those, and we're calling them nuclear options, that's probably not the right word to use, but all of those would have a significant impact on either the performance of the new plant, especially the ozone. That's the tool for treating taste and odor. The other ones would have pretty severe impacts on just operations and how that goes. And basically it's leaving the storage tanks outside, leaving the set flock outside and those types of things. So big number items, but we really would prefer to press on with the project and see if any of those hard hitting, especially hard hitting options are needed later on.
Okay, thank you.
The quick ones? Mayor Pro Tem Knutson, you've been involved with some of these VE ideas and going through all this process. What do you think?
Actually, I think we did a pretty good job. I mean, we knocked about 5% off the cost of the project without any major hits other than, I mean, we define those nuclear options, so we know what the costs are to them, but they're last resort type things. But we did trim out a lot of the like mechanical systems, some of the redundant stuff that we struggled with on the last review that Jacob's been willing to work with us on where Stantec wasn't. So, and I mean, we went through everything on that thing. So it took us a couple weeks to go through it. We got numbers back from Hydro, so we had decent information to base those judgment calls on.
You think that when we get to these 60% drawings, get this scope defined and there might be some more options in there?
There might be a few. I mean, our biggest thing that could happen is if material prices actually calm down.
Right.
That's the biggest wild card in the whole thing, and it is for any construction, not just the water plant. So,
Got it. You think moving into the fall and the winter months might have something to do with some of that? Maybe
we might get lucky.
might get lucky there with that. Okay. Others?
My only concern is we've already seen it go up 4 million in the last 4 months. I know we'd hope that material prices go down, but are we going to see another 4 million get added in the next 4 months?
I don't know.
Because that's my primary concern is, I guess we can talk more about this when we get to the wastewater plant, but the financial position we're in is it's not good. It's really bad.
Yeah, I know the increase was not expected like that. I think you have to get to the 60% to really find that's when you get the picture. That's when we'll know for sure.
Well, what's going to change at 60%? I'm like, if we see another 4 million at 60%, do we cut at that point and back down? Or we just say, well, we're now stuck with an additional $8 million in expenses that we can't afford? That's my concern, is anything going to change if we say, well, we're just going to hold off until we get to 60% and we're going to hope and pray that the numbers come down? I feel like we need to be able to say, how are we going to afford this? Because understanding that doing the water plant is not in a vacuum. If we do this size of a water plant, it requires a certain size of a sewer plant, which is another $40 million. So it's not that we're just talking about the $30 million for the water plant. We're also talking about $40 million required to build a sewer plant that can match that.
Right.
So in essence, we're saying this is a more or less $60, $70 million project because it requires this other project to go with it. That's my concern, is where it's going to put us in position financially.
Fair enough.
I do have a question now.
Yeah.
Well, it's not actually a question that probably can be answered. It's more of a thinking question. Typically, from my experience with construction projects, especially that include equipment of this nature, which is kind of my wheelhouse, industrial equipment, even if we downsized, the price isn't going to change a whole lot. It doesn't cost that much more money for a pump that's 8 inches or 10 inches. There is no significant savings there. Unfortunately, costs are going up. I mean, this phone goes off daily on cost increases from every one of our manufacturers that we deal with, and we have 15,000. I get 1,000 emails a day from somebody saying we're increasing our prices, and it's been going on since November of last year. I don't see prices going down in the next 2 to 3 years. So, I mean, in all reality, what I see is the question is, do we build a water plant or do we not? Those seem to be probably the two options that we're going to have to face. Because downsizing it, you're not going to see a $10 million savings by downsizing. You're just not going to see it. I mean, they're value engineering stuff to downsize and take things out that won't necessarily be, significant to the operation, and they were only able to get 5%. So I'm just preparing everybody for what I see as the inevitable question to this board and to this town. Do we build a water plant or don't we? Because I think that's what it's going to boil down to.
I don't know if, is that really, is a yes or no question? Is that really, I don't know if that's doable.
I know. I'm just
I mean,
saying,
yeah,
I think, and at the end of the day, downsizing the plant isn't going to be significant enough savings to not build the plant as, advertised. And Bob's probably going to come up here and tell me I'm wrong, but.
No, you're right. What I was just going to say is that there is a third option. Really, not building a plant is not so much of an option, right? We are right at capacity. We have lots of equipment that's outdated, falling apart. Something needs to happen at the plant just to stay at a steady state. And as you pointed out, there's not a real big difference when you have a process. It requires X number of pumps, X amount of concrete, and reducing the sizes of things just doesn't yield an equivalent cost reduction. So I think that this is something that's good to understand about both projects. There's really no status quo for either one of these projects. Something has to happen on both projects. And on the wastewater side, which we're about to talk about, it's even more marked on that project in terms of the things that need to happen for us to just keep up and stay in compliance.
Well, I guess it's gonna be wait and see for the 60%. See what we're up against. We're not, that's all, that's the direction we're headed.
So I had one final question, and certainly there's on the federal level, a lot of talk about infrastructure. And I know the $2 million was something that I saw identified in the National League of Cities proposed allocation for the town of Wellington. I mean, obviously with the time frame it takes to design and permit and get approvals from Colorado Department of Health and Environment, is this project considered shovel ready? I mean, obviously you're not going to start pouring concrete tomorrow, but from a standpoint of going after additional federal monies, how do they consider that? And is that a possible option?
It's close to shovel ready. We're at 30% design, so you couldn't take those plans and go out and start building it just yet. But it's just a matter of months before we would be at 95% ready to start work. And we'll probably need to pre-purchase quite a bit of the equipment, not just because of the lead times that were bad before, but are worse now. We're tracking all the sources of money. Unfortunately, right now, there's not a lot of grants out there for water, wastewater. The grants always go to the glamour projects like highways and transportation and transit and things like that. But we are following the Recovery Act, and that does right now appear to have some water, wastewater money in it, utility money. So we'll be tracking that kind of continuously and hope to get in line for whatever's available when we know what that is.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
But we also have state level too.
The state, you call the state and they'll tell you, we help you out with the SRF program, a low interest loan program. And that's the program that we're currently using for the water plant. The state revolving fund program for utilities.
You mentioned 2x4s and all that kind of thing. How much of this buildings and all this is wood frame? It's not wood framed.
No, most of it's
steel
concrete.
studs, right? It's all-
Yeah, it's mainly steel and
Yeah, it's
concrete,
mainly steel. Yeah, okay.
but those prices have gone up as well.
Right. It's across the board.
Yeah. So we've talked to, and we could get our Jim with Hydros on board so he could talk a little bit about escalation and his the research he's done in terms of feeling comfortable with this 30% price, if that's something you guys would like to hear.
You think it's worth a question, Hydro, for, I don't know, comfort level?
It's up to the rest of the board from my standpoint, because I know I have concerns. It's not that I have concerns that Hydro's doing anything wrong or I distrust the numbers. I believe it. I've heard the same concerns. My concern has nothing to do with that. My concern is that I'm worried about us putting the town in a position where it is going to have over $70 million worth of debt that it has to make payments on. And we're talking about $4 million a year in debt payments on a budget of $16 million in revenue a year. And to give some perspective, just in basic numbers from what I've pulled up to Windsor, who's a larger town, their revenue is 60 million. They have $190 million in assets. They have $20 million in liabilities. That's a ratio of assets to liabilities of 0.10. We currently have $16 million in revenues. We have $127 million in assets. We have $32 million in liabilities currently. That will jump up to $68 million in liabilities if we take on the sewer project, which will put us, we're currently at a 0.25 ratio, and that will be at a 0.53 ratio of assets and liabilities. A healthy rate is somewhere in the 0.1 to 0.2. That is incredibly concerning because all of our numbers that we're looking at that make this work assume that once the plants are built, that growth continues at a 6% rate. What happens if the housing market busts and builders aren't building anything? We don't have tap fees coming in. How are we going to make that $4 million payment?
With all due respect, Mayor Hammond, would it be okay if I were to have an opportunity to ask a question? I haven't had a chance yet.
Oh, sure.
Ms. Garcia, according to information that I've seen coming down from the state, at DOLA, there's $1.3 billion coming down to local government for projects. Who is currently overseeing the grant management for the town?
So right now, Judi Tippets, our finance director, has been involved in phone calls and one-on-one discussions with Department of Local Affairs. We have someone that we're working with to see, they're helping us determine what the best grants are for us to apply for, that we would have the best chance at receiving, because we all know making those grant applications, it's not an easy process. So right now, Judy's taking care of that.
Because I saw last week, the state did direct appropriation for grant funding, and I think that that was one of the projects that was listed.
Mhm.
So on top of that, there's the $1.3 billion in opportunities from DOLA.
Mhm.
Does this town still qualify as a rural community according to the census? Do we know?
Don't know that. Judy, are you on?
No.
I thought once you got above 10,000, there may be.
Yeah, we
They
haven't.
changed that threshold limit. They actually
Right.
increased the USDA population threshold limit, I think it was like 20 or 50,000. It was a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, it's changed dramatically, and Judy's online, getting on. She's been filling me in on the high level information, but I'm not sure about the details.
Yeah, and just a little bit of information for the board, like the federal appropriation money that came down from the state, that grant notification came out and there was 3 days to apply for it. So some of this grant funding and opportunities, it's fast. The staff has to be ready to act, and we have to make sure that we have a clear plan in place. But there seems like once the money is distributed down from the federal level to DOLA, there's a lot more flexibility and more opportunity for the town to apply for programs. And they've stated at the state level that water and infrastructure
Mhm.
are large, they're key points of this funding that they want to make available. So I think that even though what we've seen currently is limited, they haven't completely set up the guidelines yet for how that money is going to be distributed out, or how to apply for it. You know, they get to be very detailed, and grant management can turn into a full-time position. And if this is something that's really important to us and we're really concerned about the cost, then it seems like this would be something that we would want to focus on. And so where this is all headed to is, who is the person that is overseeing grant management for the town? And it sounds like it may be Judi. And I mean, is that the highest and best use of her time? Is there a way that we can shuffle something around to try and?
I would love to say yes, but there's, right now, she is the one that is the most well-versed in knowing what we need in order to, so if it comes to the time of submitting for the grant, you know, creating the grant document, submitting, we'll turn that over to someone else on staff. Right now, Judy's the one that has the contacts. She's been sitting in on all of the webinars that have been held at the state and federal level. Judi, do you want to talk a little bit about where we're at with the DOLA funding or requests and things like that?
Certainly. So to Trustee Ashley, the $130 billion is what we're waiting to see how that comes through. Some of it will come directly through the states, and then what the states do with that, we don't know. And so if they make it a new program, it could be 2 to 3 years. We will continue to watch that. And what Bob referenced earlier was, if they push that through an existing program like the state revolving fund, they could be, what they would use is the infrastructure that's already in place. I use infrastructure, but the grant process that's already in place for qualifying, but some of those monies would be grants instead of low interest money that would get paid back. So the question is, we don't exactly know. The portal that opened last week was for 50,000. You had to have 50,000 people and population and more. Next week, we have another meeting, our whole team, we will meet, and part of that conversation is with DOLA. I continue to visit with them all the time. I also sit through the CPA Society. I have one on Friday. So it's pretty much what I check every single morning from about 4 in the morning until 6 in the morning, looking at, I have just a whole list of websites that we look at to see what, what's moving, what's shaking. And so far they don't know. And so unfortunately, until we see, and, making sure that we are shovel ready, making sure the 30% numbers are solid, that we could move on them, because it is, if we started those grants, we would have to have the information. So I feel like we are strategically in a great place. What we are watching for is something that lines up with us. And I have other folks that are watching for us as well. I've had lots of conversations with DOLA, and they have a pretty good feel. And not that, doing the water and the sewer so close together actually is to our benefit if funding becomes available, because it's one of those things you get points or criteria for need. And so that would definitely be one of those things. And so, to Patty's point, I keep watching and watching. And if I get into a position where we need to pull the trigger and I don't have the bandwidth, I will be in front of her and we will get help. We will not be at risk to miss an opportunity. I think, as Patty has referenced, it is the number one thing that we focus on.
So the 30, 60, and 90% stages are helpful in gathering information and providing levels of funding for submitting for these grants. Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the first questions they ask you, because when the money comes out, they'll be asking you. So Tyler and I were on a call, and even though we've already pulled the trigger on the water funding, there is a potential funding that we would apply for on the water, because our numbers have come in over on that. Because our numbers, we have solid 30% numbers on that. Same program, it would probably be 2022 for the wastewater treatment plant. So again, same grant, different timing, depending on where our numbers are.
So then with Public Works keeping you abreast of the projects that they're having to cut, is there an opportunity maybe to fund the projects that we cut through some of these grant opportunities? I mean, is that something that's being taken into consideration?
Absolutely. We
watch
watch.
the wastewater and water treatment plant, but may be eligible for one of the other projects that we've cut. Are we just trying to track everything and see what we can capture, or are we being very strategic and targeted in what we're looking for with grants? Because the grant list can be very long and time consuming, and you have other day-to-day duties to do as well.
Right. So there is a couple different websites, and I can share those with you later, but one of them is SAM's. So we're in there, and it's the portal. So what's important for us right now is some of the funding that would become direct to the state. I do know that there are other opportunities, and I've mentioned to Patty, I think a couple other municipalities actually have gone out and got lobbyists. But right now, we don't have, they just, on this American Recovery money, they have not given clear, definitive language on the use. And that's the big thing, the big takeaway. And then there was another one, which was AWWA, and they put on about a 3-hour last week on, and so they are watching it as well. And if they get wind of something before, that will be pushed through the states, or again, if it's a new project, that's not always beneficial, because by the time it goes back and forth, it could be 2 to 3 years before that money is available. And so we just continue to watch that. And there are, like I said, there are other folks out there that know the situation we're in, and they watch as well.
Thank you, Ms. Tippets, and thank you, Ms. Garcia, very much for your time. And thank you, Mayor Hammond, for entertaining the floor.
Well, that's important stuff.
Mhm.
All that money.
Yes, it is. We're keeping it.
That's got to be number one priority.
We are keeping a tight eye on it. We've also retained a gentleman out of Fort Collins who was very successful with helping the town of Kersey receive some grant funding for some of their projects in town. So we met with him, staff met with him maybe 2 weeks ago. We're providing him a list of the items that we would like to get some grant funding for, and he has the connections to help us find grants that fit those needs. And I think some of those items that we have on our list that we might be removing on our CIP list in order to be able to fund the wastewater treatment plant or the water treatment plant, he's going to be looking for grants for those items as well.
Is there anything this board can do to help
Not that I know of, not unless you, well,
you? We can make phone calls, we can do stuff.
Yeah,
I don't know.
right now it's not phone calls. I think right now, I mean, if you're seeing anything, I mean, we get information from Trustee Whitehouse on a regular basis, grants that he sees that are available, or studies that might be helpful and things like that. So forwarding information like that's really helpful. And once we get to the point where we believe we have a grant that we need to write, get ready, I think, using the trustees to help us put that together would be incredibly supportive of that grant. It does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of head work, a lot of background information. So you all have a lot of that information where some of us are fairly new and don't have that.
Is there any need for adjustments in the budget to accommodate more support for grant searches or consultants or?
So we had some money, I used some money in the budget for this particular consultant. It was like $1,200. It's not much. I have been in contact with the city of Fort Collins. They have hired not just a lobbyist, but a firm to help with their quest. And in a meeting of the regional managers, Mr. Atterbury said that that smaller communities could piggyback on with that. And I immediately said, does that mean Wellington? And he said, absolutely. So talked with him last week. He said that we were not forgotten, that they, are still in that holding pattern like we are. There's a lot of information that's not defined yet, what exactly the monies can be spent on. So I feel good with partnering with Fort Collins, and they understand. I've been very honest with him about where we're at and the help that we need. And, we're a sister city to him. So, wanting some of that regional support. So I'll let you all know if we need some other support financially on this. Right now, I think we're doing fine with the staff that we have. To hire a lobbyist, Windsor just hired a lobbyist. It was 60 grand. And I think that's a chunk of money. But when I talked with them about it, they said, well, if it's 60,000 that gets us, 50 million, then it's money well spent, but there's no guarantee of funds. So, we're in a little different place than Windsor is. So I'm trying to talk to the other municipalities, see how they're trying to get involved in getting the latest and greatest information. And I think we're doing that.
Okay. Yeah, we need to do that. And if we need to put more effort into it financially, we need to do that. There's that kind of money out there for us.
Absolutely. I'll keep you looped.
I think you'd get support.
Absolutely.
These are important projects, and Mayor Gary brings up Trustee Gary brings up good points. Do we or not do we? Really appreciate it. It's a team effort. Let's understand that. It's a team effort, and this is important. And to be able to pay for it too, that's important. So
very much so.
Man, let's just keep up the effort and let us know so we can help.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I will let you know.
Is there anything else? Well, I appreciate your input and points, everyone. So if that's it, then if there's nothing else, I guess we can move on to our next item, can't we? And see what happens down the road here in about another 2 months. So next item, wastewater treatment plant expansion funding strategy, take 2.
Mayor and trustees, Patty Garcia, Town Administrator. This is round 2 of the wastewater treatment plant financing discussion. The packet includes information provided at the April 20th work session, along with questions that have been received by the trustees and the related answers. A financial model was presented at the work session, and it was provided to the trustees and also placed on the website, the town's website, for the public to use. The upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant in 2006 was a bare bones upgrade, and due to the minimal work done on it, the next upgrade is needed. This is needed not only from a demand issue, but due to regulatory and compliance issues. Staff has looked at many financing options, everything from starting the project over to low and slow growth scenarios. Not moving forward in a timely fashion will put the current plant in a precarious situation. The demand may push the treatment plant too hard, which would cause compliance issues. I spoke to a town manager in Northern Colorado a couple weeks ago whose wastewater treatment plant had compliance issues, and they're looking at a $5 million fine based on not having compliance issues. So they are scrambling, trying to figure out how to pay for that. Staff has provided information relative to these issues to the trustees tonight when requested. So everything in your packet and any questions you have, there's been nothing really additional added. The goal of staff has been to recommend the infrastructure needed to keep the community safe and to assure the Board of Trustees and residents are not having to revisit this issue again in 5 to 10 years. It's a difficult balance to look at funding options and still try to get the plant built without increasing rates. There are a lot of variables at play, as we've talked about. No one likes rate increases. We certainly don't. We hear it from the citizens. I know you all hear it from the citizens as well. We're working hard to find options that would be palatable. And really what we're still at are the three scenarios that we have provided to you before. We have a couple extra scenarios to provide to you tonight that are closer to a slow growth scenario for you to look at and see how that balances out. We're here to provide information that we have and to answer any questions you all have. So Dave Meyer, our resident Excel spreadsheet guru, is going to take off on this. Take it off, Dave.
I might be the one person who typed in the numbers and everything, but it was a team effort. So it's not myself, but Cody and Bob and DJ and Mike, everybody, finance team. So I'm going to share screen here real quick. Let's see. So just a quick recap on the recommended rates that we presented last month and the finance spreadsheet. This is the input page where we have a $36 million expansion cost coded in right now. That number, as you just seen for the water plant, is a moving target. So we'll need to keep that in mind moving forward. So input parameters looking at the next expansion to the plant in roughly 2037. We're calling that phase 4. And the other thing that's built into this spreadsheet and the ones I'm about to show you are the next expansion, phase 4, that we would be self-funding 50% of that with monies that we're putting into the reserve, and then taking a loan out for the other 50%. So keep that in mind as we're moving forward. The next page shows the growth rates that are built in to this analysis. This is the one we showed you a month ago with these growth rates here that I've highlighted for the next 4 years that will be as conducive as we can get right now to our current capacities. And then open for business in 2025, where we can go to a roughly 5% growth and then slowly start coming down after that. So you can see the growth rates coming down after 2025. The analysis, I'm not going to walk through this again, but this is where the number crunching goes on this page. And finally, we get our rates displayed here in a chart, what the impacts of the rates are to the sewer fund. So the recap, we recommended roughly in 2023, a $38 base rate and a $14.50 usage rate, and with slow increases from that to keep our sewer fund solvent, to pay for the SRF loan, which is what this red line is, to pay it off in 2036 before the next expansion, whatever that remaining balance is. In this case, it's $12 million to pay that off, and then have enough funding left after that to fund half of the phase 4 cost. So moving on to a growth scenario that we prepared today, in fact, we entertained the option of a reduced growth rate from what I just showed you to what we're calling a 3% growth. So you can see the 3% growth is typed in right here with a slight growth taper that occurs to match some realistic patterns that would be occurring. And Cody can speak more to that. Cody, jump in, please, if you need to. I don't know if you're unmuted yet, along with the rest of our team here. But this pattern matches exactly the one you just saw for our preferred option.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave. This is Cody Bird, Planning Director. The taper that Dave has been referring to in the growth projections, one of the things that we really caution against is using a straight line extrapolation over multiple years. What you'd see at 3%, when you compound that on a growing population, those numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger in future years. I think in reality, what you see is as the population continues to grow 12,000, 14,000, 16,000, your growth percentage declines. And that's what this model is actually showing you. So we don't use 3% every year. What we're showing you is something that's more realistic for the pattern of growth that we would expect.
Okay, thank you, Cody, for that. So with that 3% growth scenario, as we're calling that, we had to do some adjustments to the impact pages that I showed. So we reduced the amount of our expansion cost to $25 million. This is for phase 3. That's assuming a very minimal capacity expansion of about 1.2 MGD, as opposed to the 1.8 that we're shooting for right now. It's very important to note that there's a lot of repercussions behind this number. The big thing is timing. Should we need to tell Jacobs that we're going back to the drawing board and reducing the capacity to 1.25 or any other number than 1.8? We're essentially going back to the drawing board. That's going to put us back at least 6 months, which is something we really can't afford in our schedule. We will also, should we do this reduction in the plant capacity, we'll also be looking at another expansion in less than 20 years, even if we assume a 3% growth scenario. And if that happens, we'll be stacking debt again. The other thing that's built into this scenario is I've got the phase 4 expansion, future expansion, hard coded in to start in 2037 on the analysis page here. Even though the reality is, with the growth rate and the dollar amount and the capacity we're putting in for the current expansion, we'll be needing to start on that in 2029. So 8 years from now. So keep that in mind. So with those inputs and the analysis page, here are the results with a 3% growth scenario. We'd be looking at roughly, for 2022, $25 base rate. Next year, 2023, 35, 50, 60, 65. It goes up pretty quickly to make the sewer fund solvent and to allow us to pay for a $25 million loan and allow us to pay off that debt in 2036. So it looks better for a couple of years, but then it goes right back up to where we're at for our recommendation. I'm going to stop right there and see if the rest of the team has any additional comments on this particular scenario.
Our team or your team?
Oh, I'm sorry, the internal team here. Judi, Tyler, Mike Flores, Bob, Cody.
I mean, we're all on the same team, I'm just mean.
How about our task force? Let's put it that way. Our financing task force.
Dave, I think we're good on this end.
Okay. The other scenario that we prepared is let me open it up here. Even a lower growth scenario. We're calling it a 1.5% growth. So even a reduction further to the growth of 1.5 instead of 3%. Again, this is the same pattern. It even goes negative here in the latter years in the 2040s. Adjusting the input parameters. Again, the phase 3 expansion down to $15 million, which is pretty impractical, but for illustrative purposes only, we put in $15 million. And again, those same repercussions come into play behind this number. Same thing here. We are looking at a lower reduction or a lower increase in the capacity. Instead of bringing it up to 1.25, we're bringing it up to 1.1 under this scenario, which means our next plant expansion will be needed in 2025, even with a 1.5% growth rate. We're looking at expansion already in 5 years from now. The resulting rates to that scenario look a little bit more expensive in the sewer base rates than what I just showed you under 3%. And I should also mention that we did not make any adjustments to the sewer usage rates here in these scenarios. We're looking at changes to the base rates because these are more the guaranteed income. So what you're seeing here, I mean, this from the chart, it looks good. Like, wow, well, we have, $14 million in 2035, but we have to remember we'll be paying off that loan in 2036. So you see a huge drop right there, a little bit of a buildup, and then another huge drop in these years when that next expansion comes online, hard coded into this scenario to occur in 2037. So those are the two scenarios that we prepared. I also have a zero growth scenario here that I was playing with. If we needed to, like, I could bring that up. But I think we're illustrating now what happens when we start going to a lower growth scenario. Is there anything that I missed from the task force? Questions?
Thank you very much for putting these together. It's really helpful to be able to see that. Would you be able to run, what would the numbers look like at the 1.5% growth rate, but with our current cost of expansion? What would our rates have to go to stabilize the fund?
That's Trustee Gator speaking. I think,
yes.
Right? Okay. Sorry, thank you. Can't see who's talking on our screen. So that's a simple matter of putting this back up to 36 million. Doing it on the fly here. You can see the impact of that right away. We need to stay above this orange line right here, which is our reserve capacity. That's 110% of our annual debt services. So the way I usually do this, Trustee Gator, is I change everything back to no change at all to our base rates and our usage rates. Okay. So this says that we're okay in 2022, but in 2023, we are short $837,000. So now it becomes a numbers game. Start increasing this. 55 seems to work. And for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to change the sewer base rates. So you can see we're already at $75 for a base rate in 2026, and we're still not solvent. 90 works. And the other way to get at that is to start, these increases sooner. So, make this one at 60, make this one at 70, make this one at 80. We still got a problem here in 2026, so that's got to go up. We're $2 million short in 2027, so that's got to go up. So now we're getting at beyond a 5-year look here. Change that to 80. We're okay.
Hi, Dave. It's Jude. Just 2022. Yep. Thanks.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Dave. You don't have to go all the way through.
Okay.
And that's my concern, is that if the economy goes in the can and our growth rate drops to 1%, if we don't want our sewer fund to go insolvent, that's what happens.
The issue isn't the economy. It's the policy that this board sets on growth in the community. Dave's example here showed us exactly why we have to be strategic about managing the growth in the community. Because if we reduce the amount of growth of residential rooftops in our community to a point to where we can't sustain the growth, I mean, you've seen what happened. It's just not feasible. So the other thing that the board should also understand is that I believe that this feasibility information is strictly based on residential growth rates. It's not realizing the impact fees from the commercial growth. And commercial growth follows residential rooftops. So if we want to continue to see commercial growth, we have to have strategic and managed residential rooftop growth. So I would urge this board to reconsider the position of absolutely no growth, because that is not going to sustain what we need to meet the minimum requirements of providing essential services to our community.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it gets grim really fast.
The other thing I'm noticing from the models that we're looking at is the smaller plant options, which of course would require us to start over, are completely impractical, because if they would require a new plant within the 20 years, that is a very grim situation as well. So based on what I'm seeing from the models, going back and starting over with creating a smaller capacity plant doesn't seem viable either.
I think the term is kicking the can, right?
Yeah.
That's why we're here today having this discussion, is because 5 years ago, the board made the decision based off of information from staff that this was what we needed to meet the projected growth. And at that time, nobody knew that the growth was going to be what it is in the Wellington community. They did their best to do projections to meet the needs, and we undershot it. And now this board has to make a decision so that we're not kicking the can down the road again.
Yeah, I don't think that's I think this board the last year has not been easy for sitting here in these chairs and some of the decisions we've had to make. And I don't believe anyone here is wishing to kick the can down the road. I think we're trying to find viable, reasonable solutions. And oftentimes it seems we're forced to pick the least worst one, which is not, but we will decide something. I don't think we're going to close. Once your eyes are opened, I don't think you can close them again and say, we'll we're not going to deal with it. I don't think that's going to happen. It doesn't make this job much fun though. That's for sure.
Probably the biggest infrastructure projects in the history of the town. We're on it. I am a little confused about the concern about the next, staying ahead of that next expansion out in 2040, even if the growth goes down. But I may not just get it in this one, but without, avoiding stacking debt. I mean, if the growth goes down, you just push this thing out, you push expansion goes out further. Does that do anything to those numbers when you, in that scenario? So if growth goes down, that next expansion is going to go out.
But I think you
Further.
downsize that, this first expansion, so it gives you a smaller window. Because you're only doing the 1.1 versus 1.5.
If you did, right.
So even though you cut your growth, you're gonna catch that faster.
Are you talking about that or the 50% to fund the next expansion, phase 4?
But it seems like a lot of this cost is predicated upon a vision out there in the phase 4 expansion and the timing of it.
The 50%
Yeah.
to pay towards that.
Whatever, that kind of thing there. It just seems like it's kind of driving the numbers. That's what I'm seeing there.
Bob Gowing, Public Works Director. Probably a little recap on what the master plan that we put together for both plants really was based on. It was based on an assumption, some primary goals. We want to have a plan to get to something close to ultimate build out. We don't know what that is, but we basically assumed that would be 36,000 population at some point in the future. We knew we didn't want to stack debt. That's not really an option. These are typically 20-year loans. So we basically looked at it and said, okay, with a growth curve that kind of makes sense, where does that get us? And factoring all those things in, we came to the conclusion that it probably makes sense to kind of cut the future capacity needs, demand needs in half, tackle one with what we're calling phase 3 and tackle the second one with phase 4. So basically to cut our future demand creation in half and take care of one now. And one of the primary reasons for that is just the economies of scale that are generated in a project like this. When, as Trustee Jerome said earlier, very succinctly, when you build a plant, you have really all the same pieces. And when you make them smaller, you're just making the individual pieces. You're not able to throw pieces out, right? So you don't get a proportional reduction in cost based on a reduction in capacity. It's not even really that close. So there are just economies of scale that make sense in the long term for the community, reducing its investment in that infrastructure cost while still serving the community's needs moving forward. So I think, I'm not sure if I actually answered your question there.
I understand what you're saying too, and I get that. I mean, I even talked about you reduce something by 25%, you really only get 10% real,
something like
real
that.
change there, so you really don't get a whole lot there. But
right,
I just felt like when I look at those graphs and I keep thinking we're trying to stay ahead of that phase 4 expansion, so we're solvent by the time it comes up. Are we trying to bite off a lot too soon?
A lot of that is based on us trying to create a scenario, and this includes the whole team, that seems more responsible in moving forward and not kicking the can down the road.
No, but
it does create some pain right now. We understand that.
We're doing 20, 25, 30-year projections.
We are. None of that's going to actually happen in exactly the way we're planning for it, but we have a framework for dealing with the changes as we move forward. And without that, it's hard to understand the big picture of what you're trying to kind of create in the community. Neither one of these plants are especially big. The expansion projects, they're relatively tiny, which does kind of make them a higher unit cost per MGD the smaller you get. And we're seeing that if we basically cut what we have in half now. Well, you saw the numbers from Dave there. You're spending more money now, increasing rates and increasing impact fees, and not achieving those kind of savings that could be available through just a more efficient approach towards infrastructure expansion.
Thank you, sir.
And this is Judy again. And so, Mayor, I wanted to mention, that's a little bit about why you're seeing that sinking fund. So if we grow slower or faster, those additional funds are set aside so that we don't end up how we are right now in the water fund. We have four pieces of debt stacked together. And so if you use those funds inside of, if we set some of that money aside, what it's allowing for, and on Dave's model, you will see the sinking fund. What that does is where he says $12 million, if we get to, and the number is 3,750 taps. However we get there, that's 3.2 people per home. And we're saying this is for 12,000 people. If we get there quicker, I don't think it's responsible to carry that debt. And so what that sinking fund does is it allows us to pay that debt off before they start phase 4. And if we grow slower, you would not have additional money that you put into the sinking fund. What you don't want to do is some of what's happened in the past is be spending your impact fees for daily operations. We don't want to do that. We want to be responsible and make sure that it is for capital improvements and to service the debt on these plants.
And this is Cody Bird, Planning Director, and I think Bob and Judy both did a really nice job summing up some of those points. And I was just going to add to kind of one of the initial questions was, why are we worried about phase 4 and why are we thinking about that now? That is what planning is. It's looking forward. How do we make sure that future boards don't get stuck in the same type of difficult situations that this board has been in? When we look at what the Front Range is expected to grow over the next 20 years, doubling in the Fort Collins metro, Fort Collins isn't going to handle all of that growth by themselves. That development pressure is going to be pushing on Wellington, Severance, Windsor, all the surrounding communities. In my opinion, I think it's imprudent for Wellington to think that pressure is not going to be here. And so having options for the future is really what we are recommending as the best case scenario. Think about it now. What would it take? Have the framework in place so that when the time comes for future boards to make those tough decisions, they've got a toolkit that they can choose from instead of feeling like their backs are against the wall or painted into a corner.
Fair enough. Anyone else? Any other comments on it tonight?
The question, Judy, what is considered to be a healthy asset to liability ratio for a municipality of our size?
I will pull that for you. I don't know. I would have to look at my municipality I was at before was a different size. So let me get that to you tomorrow.
Okay, and then can you also pull together generally what is considered a good rate in terms of debt payment to income or revenue?
Trustee Gator, are you referencing the general fund or the capital fund? Because they're two different
I'm just saying in general
assets
for
and
the town and the
liabilities.
whole. I understand. I'm doing overall large picture right now because if I go smaller, which I can, it gets worse. The position does not get better if I look at just what our water revenues are versus that, because our current assets and liabilities are okay right now. But if we do this expansion, it's going to get ugly, and all of that is going to be in the sewer and water funds. And so we're not talking about $4 million of debt coming out of $16 million of revenue. We're talking about $4 million of debt coming out of about $6 million of revenue.
Well, and I think that's where we need to be clear about where we're asking for information, because the $16 million, that comes from a different revenue source, and that money is applied to different projects. And that the way that I'm interpreting what you're asking information for doesn't provide clarity on the liability to the town with the ability to fund these projects from the asset and liability section that they're housed under. So that's all. I guess my question would be to Ms. Tippets, in response to Trustee Gator's questions, and not this evening, I'd be happy to receive them via email, specifically for the capital fund and not necessarily for the general fund.
You are
What that
absolutely
healthy
correct.
ratio
Yes.
is. I mean, my interpretation of good government budgeting and accounting is that you don't carry over debt from year to year. The intention is that the amount of revenue you bring in offsets the cost of doing business, because as a municipality, we're not out to make money, we're out to provide services. And we should only be collecting enough to provide those services. So when we're talking about big projects like the water treatment plant, those revenues are housed in the capital fund and are separate from the general revenue fund. So when we're looking at the health and financial feasibility of being able to fund these projects, I'm concerned that there could be confusion about assets, liabilities, and revenue, because we're really talking about two different things.
Trustee McDonald, you're absolutely correct. We're talking about pretty much the definition of enterprise accounting. These are both enterprise funds, so you cannot use general funds monies. And so I will respond tomorrow, but you're absolutely correct that we need to look inside of the fund, and you can't look outside. I've used buckets before, but you can't look outside of the walls of whatever. So the water fund is the water fund, sewer fund is the sewer fund, and our general fund is the general fund. And those you can't cross over. And so I'll get some information to you guys tomorrow. But what you're describing is correct. We cannot cross over there. So I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but it isn't. If the funding would not come from the general fund, it's not fair to start just talking about a ratio. You need to look inside of that fund, what we're funding. And again, that's, why we're talking about the rates. And basically what you're giving is the definition of fund accounting, that you must stay within side of the walls in order to meet those debts. So I'll get you guys some information tomorrow, and then if you have additional questions, just let me know.
So to give some clarity to Trustee McDonald's question, our water fund currently has $43 million in assets. This is as of 2019. And it currently has $26 million in liabilities. Our sewer fund currently has $9 million in assets, and it currently has $3 million in liabilities. So if we were to just look at those broken out, it would go from the number I gave you earlier, which was a 0.25 or 0.54 to we would have more than 3 times the amount of debt or liabilities in our sewer fund as we would in assets. So that kind of gives you a clarification. So we would have close to 36.
It doesn't. I'll wait and get the information from Judi.
Yeah, I'd like to get it from our finance director tomorrow, if that's okay, to satisfy Trustee Gator's concerns and yours and all of ours.
I think it's a valid
It
question.
really is. No, it is. We need to know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate.
So I completely understand not wanting to saddle the next board with the same problems we're faced with. My concern is that we saddle them with an increasingly high amount of debt that the town can't afford. And that's going to go off on the citizens. That's my concern.
Yeah, I got it. I just want to get it from our, and then we'll come back to it when we get from her as well, find out what's appropriate, what's not, and I'll understand. Good points. Thank you very much. Anything else on this subject? Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. Well, sure we'll be coming back to this again soon.
I think we will.
Yeah, probably a lot.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but is we have to make a decision on funding for this wastewater treatment plant within the next month. Is that correct, staff? So I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of time to come back and revisit a decision on the sewer plant, because correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is we have to make a decision on funding sources within the next month or 2 months maybe. So please correct me if that's incorrect.
The actual decision is more related to the impact fees and the rate, the revenue side of the equation. We've got the plant in the 5-year plan, and we've already executed a contract and appropriated money for the design phase. So when the actual decision gets made is when we would execute the construction part of the project with our CMAR, our construction manager at risk. That would typically happen at 90%. So that actual kind of appropriation of the construction money would happen in several months down the road.
Clarification, because I believe in Ms. Tippets' report at the end of April, she said we had to make a decision on funding for the SRF fund, I think, or maybe it's something else within 60 days. So am I incorrect in that? Because I understand we're not spending the money now, but if we're having to go and sign up for the loan now, whether we're spending the money now or not, we're committing to paying back a $30+ million loan.
There's a lot of initial steps to getting into the SRF program. We have to produce a utility plan. I see Dave on the screen. He could talk about this too, but we've got to get kind of a lot of additional work done to get in line for the SRF, but we wouldn't actually be closing that until, I believe, January. Dave and Judi, am I correct?
Yeah, Bob, this is Dave. That's correct. Utility plan, chapter utility plan, we will have to address our financing plan for moving forward on paying for this wastewater plant expansion. That is near completion right now. We want to submit that to North Front Range as soon as we can. It's okay to leave placeholders in there for a few weeks, for a couple months, but eventually we'll have to have an answer for North Front Range how we're going to pay. Same thing with the SRF loan. As Bob stated, we'll be formally applying for it in January of 2022. That's when we have to have a dollar amount. That's when we have to be able to show the state this is how we'll be repaying that loan. And as another topic here is regarding the SRF loan. When we do have to take this to a public meeting later this summer, early fall, we will start having to address the financial picture. What our anticipated rate increases might look like, what our finances might look like. So yes, Trustee Gaither, you're correct that we'll have to hone in on a number within the next few months.
Okay, but we're not committed. We're not making a commitment to a $36 million loan in the next. Okay, that's what I was worried about. So thank you very much.
I think it's important to acknowledge too that this, as a working session, we are making no decisions during this session. We're just being presented with a ton of research that our valuable staff has provided to us through a lot of analysis. So I do appreciate that. But just for any members of the public who might be tuning in or here, know that there's no decisions being made right now. We're just being presented as much information as possible. And it's important to note that there is a town hall scheduled for this topic coming up later at the end of the month. And so that's where we will seek feedback from the public and also provide and pass along a lot of the information that we're receiving onto the public as well. So everybody has a more holistic picture. It may look in some instances where we're making decisions or looking at models and have preferences, but we are receiving recommendations from our staff, and that's what we have requested from them. So I just want everybody to be very clear on what's happening right now from a public perspective.
Okay, thank you all. Okay. Thank you, staff. I look forward to talking about it again soon. Okay. Let's move on to item 3. This is a water tap, all water cash in lieu of sewer tap fees discussion. This is our planning team. Cody?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start this off, but recognize that it has been a team effort and some of these questions might be better answered by a couple of our other staff members. But just to kind of frame the context, the town does collect impact fees and charges for connection to our public utility services, as well as other impact fees for various things like transportation, parks, trails, and other things. So what we're discussing tonight is proposed changes to the water tap fee, the sewer tap fee, and the raw water cash in lieu rate. Just for some background, and you're all probably going to recall these things, but I'm going to just kind of restate them for those who might be listening in from home. Last week, the town increased our water tap fee. That's the charge for connection to the town's water system at the time of a new permit being pulled for new construction. It was increased by $2,000 from $5,500 to $7,500. That was largely based on some mathematical calculations that were done when we prepared the budget for 2021. Working with the finance department, what we've found was that actually those charges probably should be $7,750 with some proposed annual increases each year hereafter, just to kind of keep pace with the growth rates that we're expecting over these couple critical years and into the future, and balancing that with what the projected revenue streams would look like to pay the debt service on existing loans. So that's on the water tap. That is the kind of what staff is recommending as a change to that water tap connection for a standard 3/4 inch water tap. The other component of our water impact fees is that that's really only one element, is that 3/4 inch meter. It's the most of what we do. It's the largest majority of our water connections. But last week, the resolution the board adopted, we had not had time to prepare what the water tap charges would be for larger meter sizes for, say, commercial development or multifamily apartments, et cetera. So what we've kind of prepared and put in your packet tonight, it includes that kind of proportionate, as meter sizes increase, the volume of water increases proportionately based on that 3/4 inch. So that's how the pricing is structured for those larger tap sizes. We calculated what the proportionate impact fee would be for a 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch meter. Once it gets over 2 inches, we would recommend that it's really a calculation based on the proposed use. When you get into water that volume, it really needs to have some special consideration. So then leading into the sewer impact fees, a lot of this relates to the conversation we just had on the wastewater treatment plant funding scenarios. Obviously, there's a lot of information there that still needs to be digested. The board's going to be tasked with a difficult decision-making process on how to balance user charges and impact fees. They're both a piece of that equation. Currently, what we've put in your packet is that number based off of what was in the recommended option 3 from that wastewater treatment plant funding scenario discussion. That's 9,700. The current fee is 7,500. You can see that in the table on page 15. I believe it's, yeah, page 15 is the table. So that's a $2,200 increase that's proposed based on that mathematical model that Dave and team just presented. So what we also added was a new, so that fee is for a standard 4-inch sewer connection. I should reiterate that. What we also included is a fee for a 6-inch. That's a higher volume of water. It takes more to treat it. So we needed to provide that option. We do have a few of those every year that are considered. And then anything beyond that size, again, we would recommend calculating that. When you get over that size, it's usually a pretty specific use. So we would need to consider what that use is and how the fees should be charged accordingly. Commercial is also, when you get into those larger sewer connections, you'll see in the table, there's some italicized columns under the sewer section that's further out there to the right. In the future, we would expect to see some additional charges related to sewer treatment from our commercial. They have a much larger impact from the types of organics that are put into the system, and they have to be treated differently than our typical residential waste, and that's a bigger impact. So we would expect to see some additional charges for those specific types of uses, and those fees would have to be evaluated and determined at a future date. So we just put it in there as a placeholder, knowing that those commercial components will have some additional considerations. And then the last piece that I'll present kind of at the high level is the raw water cash-in-lieu rate. The board considered the raw water component in August of last year. We did two things. One, we took a look at the raw water contribution requirement in terms of volume. Historically, the town had collected 1/2 of an acre foot per residential dwelling unit. And that was based largely on numbers that hadn't been evaluated for a while. When we took a closer look at that, we actually went back and looked at data from the town's usage from our utility billing and determined what the average acre foot requirement was for our homes. And we split that into 2 parts, an indoor component and then an irrigation component. We really wanted to dial in on what the actual usage and demand is so we could charge the appropriate raw water contribution requirement and then an associated cash-in-lieu fee. The cash-in-lieu fee was calculated based on the the current market value of shares for North Pooter Irrigation Company stock. And because those shares are not always readily available, the town also calculated inflation for those. So assuming that when we acquire shares, say this year, we may not be able, or when we accept cash in lieu this year, we may not be able to acquire the actual wet water until next year or beyond. So that inflation factor is very important for the town since those shares don't become available very often. What we found was that based on the market rates over the last 3 or 4 years, they were climbing exponentially. And so that inflation factor was a pretty big variable. In the last year, what we've seen is the North Pooter stock prices or share prices have kind of started to level off and balance a little bit. They're not seeing such a dramatic increase. And so what we're actually proposing is to update these numbers based on that kind of steadying effect in the market right now. And so we'll actually see a slight decrease in the cash in lieu for raw water requirement. So all those numbers, kind of the existing and proposed, are in that table on page 15 of your agenda packet. The last thing I wanted to kind of point out, and then I'll stand for any questions, and I think our other staff can answer questions as well. On page, I believe, 17 of your packet, I put together just a quick comparison of our current, for just the impact fees for a single family residential dwelling unit. And you can see there's 2 columns, one for current and one for proposed. Those are the current rates and proposed rates. And then the totals are at the bottom. You'll see 2 different scenarios there at that bottom line. One of them is for the combined raw water, that's indoor and out irrigation use. It's a much higher number because of the cash in lieu requirements for raw water if they have to provide, if the town has to use treated water to provide the irrigation requirements for those units. The second one is if the irrigation is provided by a non-potable system. If a subdivision has wells for irrigation, it only has only the indoor use component is included in that cost. And the last thing, just to clarify, almost all of our current subdivisions that are in development do have non-potable irrigation systems, and they have existing development agreements. And so those development agreements provide for a 50% reduction of the total raw water cost at the time a permit is pulled. And so the way we calculated that for those existing subdivisions is taking the combined number, the indoor and irrigation use, and dividing that by 2 or multiplied by 50% to get that raw water component for those non-pot systems that are currently under development, under existing development agreements. Any questions on the information that's being presented tonight? And we can pull up other staff as needed to answer any specific questions.
Anyone got questions?
I'm just going to wait for other people first, but yes, I have questions.
Okay. Anyone? Trustee Gator, let's hear it.
Okay, is our water fund, and I don't know if you know the answer, or Ms. Tippets, is our water fund at a point where we're going to start considering lowering our rates on residents? Is it stabilized? Because we're considering decreasing rates that are charged to developers. I understand that's for raw water, but is our water fund in a much better position than I was led to believe in April, that we're now considering reducing rates on developers?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Trustee Gator, just for clarification to your question, are you referring to the water tap fees, or which would be the capital investment for the infrastructure, or are you referring to the raw water, which is?
So looking at the raw water, I'm glad to hear things are stabilizing, but it is concerning that we're looking at reducing the costs of developers coming in when we're still at a place where our water fund is not in good shape. I understand this is not for infrastructure. I get it. It's for purchasing of water. And just, I'm glad to hear that shares have stabilized, but I don't think that we should be decreasing rates right now for cash in lieu, unless our fund is in a good place where we're going to be doing that across the board.
And I think that's a good points that you bring up there, Trustee Gator. When the staff brought this to the board's consideration back in August for the cash in lieu rates, I kind of recall that there was a lot of concern at the level at which that raw water rate was being considered, and it was the board's instruction to reevaluate this fee periodically to reflect changes in the market prices for acquiring raw water. And so this reduction or proposed reduction in the cash in lieu rate is reflecting that change in the market conditions in accordance with what the board asked staff to do.
Yeah, but there's also, I think, is there not a different, there's a distinction between the cash in lieu price and the base rates, which are funding infrastructure. And, you know, if you got a sewer pipe and a water pipe to your home, you're part of the system. And so you do need to fund that infrastructure. I don't think that can be pushed off onto somebody else. That's my understanding, right? That if you're connected to the system, you do need to carry some of the load for the development of that infrastructure. So I think those two things are in some ways separate, are they not? The cash in lieu, what this chart is indicating, and the base rates in the water fund for current, or the current water rates that are being charged to current customers.
Right, and I think you're getting into I think what you're alluding to, Trustee Whitehouse, and I don't want to misinterpret.
I'm not sure. I was trying to phrase that question and I wasn't doing a very good job.
That's okay. I think what you might be referring to, and correct me if I misunderstand, is the difference between the one-time impact fee charges versus the ongoing capital expense of being connected to the system, which is the user rates.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yes, that's what I was trying to draw the distinction, but I did it poorly.
I think I understand where you're headed with that.
That's one of us.
It's definitely, worth noting that there are ongoing expenses for maintaining the system. If, impact fees, if there was no growth for any variety of reasons, there's no impact fee revenues if there's no growth. And so the plant, as it ages and needs capital improvements just to maintain or upgrade the existing infrastructure for compliance reasons, failed parts, what have you, those user charges, the base rate that was increased recently, is paying for the impacts of the existing residents on the existing infrastructure to keep it in compliance and to keep it operating.
Just as a comment to something you said earlier, Mr. Bird, is regarding the raw water cash in lieu. I just want to mention that collectively we did accept those rates with the understanding that we were selecting a model that was likely aggressive according to but based on historical what we were seeing for increases in water rates. And we did indeed ask you to reevaluate that as we saw more examples of what the rates were doing, water prices were doing. So I do appreciate that you brought that back to us because that was a specific item that we asked for.
Yes, that's correct. And I should, I guess, clarify my question more. Is the adjustment based on we're staying with the same calculation that we had before, but the cost has actually gone down, therefore the cash in lieu has gone down? Or are we saying we should adjust this to make it a smaller percentage of growth expected because we don't think that the price of North Poudre is going to go up anymore? Or somewhere in the middle?
I didn't hack my crystal ball tonight, so I can't guarantee you what's going to happen in the market share values. But what I can share with you is that the methodology used to calculate the cash in lieu amount for raw water is exactly the same calculation that was used back in August. It's the same acre foot requirements, that hasn't changed. So the volume required and the calculation are identical to what the board considered in August. What has changed is that inflation factor. The calculation looked at the last 3 years of average historic prices for water. And from 2017 to 2018, there was a $40,000+ jump in that average share price. And so when we move everything forward, as as the share prices have started to stabilize here of late, we inserted the new number, which is pretty close to what we saw in 2020, which was 190,000, give or take a few $100s. And we dropped off that 2017 year. So that's a very significant change. And that's the reduction that you're seeing.
Thank you for explaining that, because I thought we were changing the calculation. That I don't have an issue with if the numbers we're working with have changed just based on what we're looking at. that makes more sense. I thought we were actually adjusting the numbers in the calculation. So that makes much more sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
It's all about dropping $280,000 for cash and lieu down to 190. Is that right for the share? That was the inflated share price that we used.
Yes, just to be clear, the 280 was with the inflation. The current 190 is the actual.
That's the actual current.
Yeah.
So now you're using the actual current. You feel comfortable using that instead of that inflated?
Well, and again, the current market price is a factor in the equation that's being used for the calculation. So the new inflation factor is still higher than 190 because we don't have the ability to acquire those shares
Oh, good.
immediately.
All right, so you're still higher than that.
It's still higher than the current market value because it's still factoring in the cost of inflation and the cost of managing and finding. And
Right.
and so those factors are still in there. And I don't have in my notes what that per acre foot or per share inflation cost would be. We might be able to get that for you if Bob has those numbers, but I didn't ask for that tonight, so I wouldn't know if he has it available just tonight. Maybe he does.
They do happen to have those available. In general, when you guys passed this back in last August, the inflation rate was calculated based on this historic share prices at 40%. It's gone down to about 25% now. That's the only real change. We haven't changed anything else in that calculation. And that's just strictly based on actual data on share prices.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying
Yeah,
that.
Trustee McDonald, got anything you'd like to add? Talk about? So it does look like you're raising the water contribution though, which is a direct cost increase.
Did you
The
mean
impact fees, I'm sorry.
the water tap
Yeah,
fee?
Which is getting back what Trustee Gator, developers are not, they're getting increased as well. Along with residents on this infrastructure.
Correct. And if you look at that example that was on page 17, what we're actually seeing is that based on what's proposed, the actual change with the water tap increase for single family homes, which is a 3/4 inch water tap and a 4-inch sewer tap, we would see a roughly $2250 based off the old 5,500 water tap. We'd see a $2250, $2,250 increase on the water, $2,200 on the sewer, and a roughly $5,000 to $6,000 reduction on the cash in lieu rate. So that bottom line it's within $500 of the impact fee cost on a current single family home.
You were able to make some adjustments that helped both this side and that side and to keep it level.
I think certainly what we've tried to do is evaluate a tremendous amount of data to come up with numbers that are very realistic in terms of what the town's needs are for our capital infrastructure projects and a market share price for raw water that's reflecting current market trends.
Yeah, I think so.
And it does work out great that they somewhat balance.
So is the developer community aware that this is sort of your analysis and what you're likely to move forward, or maybe we're likely to move forward with? I mean, I would suggest they would probably be happy to see it go down. But I think that was one of the things that we wrote into this resolution was that it needs to, again, we need to be self-sustaining. And so if the costs go down, those would be reflected in that.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of points there, Trustee Whitehouse, but I certainly to the first question, we've advised the development community, our developers and our builders. We invited them to attend this meeting. We knew that there was no public input in a work session, but they were aware that this discussion was occurring tonight, so they could hear the same information that the board's being presented with. I've had conversations with several of our developers and builders regarding these, and I expect those conversations will continue. They understand generally that as the town's capital infrastructure needs change, that fees may need to go up. What we hear most from those developers is they're trying to make their numbers work as well. And so the sudden dramatic swings in prices is really what they struggle with when, $2,000, doesn't seem like a lot when you're looking at millions of dollars in your water fund, but recovering $2,000 per house times the number of houses in that subdivision, they're trying to balance that with their infrastructure cost for providing infrastructure to serve that development And they've also got a lot of existing contracts underway with home buyers that it's tough for them to go back to the home buyer and explain why there was a sudden dramatic increase in their price of their home. So they kind of that expectation is really what's critical for the development community, is understanding when those changes are likely to occur. What's not included in this report, because this is really just reflecting what the existing and proposed fees might look like, but we've also modeled in our wastewater treatment plant fund that you've looked at. We've done the same thing on the water side. We've tried to figure out what it would take if we have to continue to increase those tap fees. How can we normalize that so that we look at annual increases of a few $100s to get to the same end goal, so that those increases are predictable for those that are impacted. And we know that those impact fees ultimately get passed on to the homeowners in the form of their mortgage going up. So we definitely want to be respectful of balancing those costs on new home buyers with the user charges as well. They're all residents of our community, and we want to make sure that those numbers are predictable and balanced to the extent that we can.
Mr. Bird, do you know what the average median household income is for the community?
I believe the latest data that I've seen, the average household income for Wellington is about $91,000.
Okay, I think that that's something to keep in mind as we're moving forward with these decisions, because you alluded to a very important point. We talk about passing this cost on to the developers. We're not passing the cost on to the developer. We're passing it on to the homeowner and the resident that's purchasing the home. So we've touted and we've talked about being an affordable community and being a great place to move to and bring your children. And we've got this great new high school coming in. But are we going to price ourselves out of the market to be an affordable community for first-time home buyers or single-family incomes? So that, I think that that's, something that we need to keep in the back of our minds too, as we're making these decisions about these increases. They're definitely necessary. But when we talk about passing on the cost to the developer, when it comes to residential development, you're not passing it on to the developer, you're passing it on to your resident.
I agree.
So I had a question on the tap fee. I'm sorry, were you done, Trustee McDonald? I didn't want to cut you off.
Yes, sir.
The concern that I have with the proposed fees, and this is kind of the same thing we've seen with the water, is we are seeing about a 30% increase in the tap fees for the sewer. But when we look at what's being proposed to balance this on the residents, it's a 77% increase. So we're looking at a 30% increase on new development, a 77% increase on existing users. And then on the year over year, we're looking at roughly a 3% increase on the development or new residents and a 5% increase on the existing users. And so the concern that I have is, yes, we have to keep in mind what is it going to look like for those moving to our community. But on the flip side, if we're trying to keep that tap fee number lower, we are passing that cost onto those residents who already lived here. The residents that are moving here have the choice to either buy the home or not buy the home. They can look at the number and say, okay, this is something I'm not willing to pay, and they can move to somewhere else. The residents who already live here may not have that opportunity. And so if we're saying, well, we're going to try and keep tap fees down, that's concerning to me, that we're looking at new residents paying 30% and existing residents having their bill increase 77%. That's not a very balanced thing. We're basically leaning on the existing residents to pay for most of the expansion that's needed for the new development.
Yeah, but you're talking volume of dollars though, too. You got to keep that in mind. You got 4,400 homes that are going up $20 a home. And then you're talking about 100 homes that are coming in with 2,000, right? I mean, volume of dollars relative to the homeowner. Yes, it's a bigger percentage, but when you look at the volume of dollars, you're getting a somewhat of a balanced share. You still got to, if you didn't do that, then the rest of that's just going to go on to the residential users. Didn't do anything.
If we were to increase the tap fees.
If you didn't increase the tap fees.
I'm not saying don't increase the tap fees. I'm saying we should probably look at doing more of a balance between pushing the tap fees more than pushing on the base rate for the residents. Because what it's at right now is it's improportionately balanced in the opposite direction.
Yeah, but what I was getting at was the percentage versus the volume of dollars. It's a little bit, I don't know if it's quite apples to apples when you look at it that way. So I don't know, when you made your projections here, your changes here, you must have done that with some sort of methodology that this is something that the development or the owner could stomach, could do, and still keep that coming, that revenue coming, rather than shut it down.
Well, I think you've touched on a couple of things, and I'll go back to Trustee Gator's comments first real quick and say that, you know, every new house that is added, as soon as the home buyer buys that, they become a user and they're paying the user fees as well. So the more users paying the user fees changes that percentage. We've also learned through these modeling exercises that even dramatic changes in the impact fees doesn't make very big of a change on the percentage split. And that's for reasons very similar to what the mayor pointed out, that particularly as we've identified this kind of critical 3 years in our ability to treat water and wastewater, looking at limitations on the number of permits to stay within our treatment capacity, we're slowing the rate of growth and the number of permits, so those impact fees are limited as well. It just doesn't make a big difference in the percentage splits. And then I would defer to others from our staff that might have better numbers than I do, but the percentage split on we're talking about two different elements here tonight. We've got the water fund and we've got the wastewater fund. Those percentage splits between impact fees and the user charges are not the same in both of those funds. They don't balance quite the same way. And those percentages are going to change with every permit issued and with every year that passes. We need to continue to reevaluate those. Long-term modeling, what we see is that those percentages do switch to a more balanced approach over time. And that's because of the way we've proposed those continued fee increases for both impact fees and the user charges, that we've really tried to present an option that focuses on exactly what Trustee Gator referred to in balancing that split. So it's proportionate and rationally based on what the actual improvements needed are.
Where do our tap fees line up in regards to other communities around us? I understand they're all different and everyone has their different. If you were to do an approximation roughly, where would you say that because I think Fort Collins and Loveland are the only two around here that have their own utilities, roughly where would their tap fees be at? So if we're talking about 75 or 9,700 and 7,500 or 7,750, roughly what would equivalent be if the builder were to do that in Loveland or Fort Collins?
Yeah, so the impact fees for Wellington are maybe just a little bit above the average for the area. There is quite a bit of variability that you see from community to community, and those variables are largely based on those communities' specific needs. They go through similar modeling exercises that look at what their needs are for their capital investment projects. And what we traditionally see is that larger communities have smaller impact fees because there's more residents paying in. The incremental cost of making those capital improvements are smaller per household or per user than a smaller community. So smaller communities are usually taxed with the burden of having higher tap fees because of that proportionate relationship on population. And I did a little bit of research. I don't know that all my numbers on all the communities are completely current. I've got a couple of calls out to see if we can get updated numbers on those. But right now we're seeing that we're probably water, we're probably right kind of in the middle, and sewer maybe a little bit higher than middle. What I would also say is that those other communities, one of the things that the development community looks at and that I look at is the total impact fee cost or the total building permit cost on new construction. That some utility fees are higher. Some communities have much higher park or trail fees, and some communities have fees that we don't have on our books. And so a lot of times the development community is looking for what's the bottom line, and where the money goes doesn't really matter as much to a builder or a home buyer as it does to the way we look at things from our financial standpoint and where those buckets of money, I love that term, buckets of money, as if we had them, but how those funds are allocated.
What is, I heard a number that the total, something the median, I don't know, build of a house, single family home was 330. in the United States, of which like $90,000 are sewer, water, impact fees, maybe building use things. I don't know what, for a single family home, I mean, what is that percentage or any sense of what that is in this community? I'm not sure exactly
Yeah.
what they were citing to get to that number, but I've got to look, I need to look that up.
Yeah, I don't know for sure tonight, Trustee Whitehouse, what those national numbers look like. And obviously, if it's national, you're going to have some on the extreme from both ends. For Wellington right now, based on what we've seen on our incoming permit data, average single family dwelling value is somewhere in the range of, I'm going from memory here, so I don't have the exact numbers, but it's in that ballpark of $320,000 to $340,000 valuation. And of that cost, you can see in the example on page 17 of your packet that has those numbers for what just the town's impact fees are. And it is at that 86 or so thousand if you have a subdivision with both the, 86,306 is the, if you have both indoor and irrigation water. Most of our current permits, because of their existing development agreements and non-potable systems, are at $52,500 for their impact fee total.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to follow up, and if I find it, I'll send it off to you folks.
Yeah,
Once
please.
you kind of get those numbers from the other communities, would you be able to send that out kind of just to the board, a breakdown of, so we can see where we're falling against other communities? Because I think that would help in kind of driving decision as to what do we do with our rates, is to understand where we're falling.
I'm certainly happy to provide that information. I would caution a little bit in using other community data to determine. I think it's a good tool to look at where we fall in the range, but I would caution against using it for actual rate setting, because our rates are set based on our needs as opposed to where we fall in the scheme of other communities. But I can certainly provide what I find. One of the things that I'll also throw out there as a caveat is it's difficult to compare apples to apples in some instances because different communities look at things a little bit differently. And it's how they calculate their impact fee. A lot of different factors go in there. One thing I was meant to mention it earlier, and I'll circle back to it just real quick because I mentioned the apples to apples comparison. A lot of communities will either build the cost of the meter into the impact fee as just part of the service that's provided. Others have a separate, this is the meter fee. That is what we are proposing in the information tonight in that table on page 15. We don't currently have a fee for meter costs. What we've done is we've talked with our suppliers for those meters to find out what the average cost of a meter is. And what we're proposing is that's just it's a pass-through fee for the town. We have to actually pay to acquire that meter that's set. And we would just pass that on to the permit fee for that particular unit.
And
It's absorbed in this number already? It's already accounted for in the increase or no?
No, it's a new column in the columns under proposed. You have the capital investment fee column, and then there's a fee called meter column. So the 3/4 inch meter is the typical one that would be included in the cost. It's the larger sizes that have, the larger the meter, the higher the cost is. And so those larger tap sizes would have an additional fee for the expense of the meter.
isn't there, I thought we got a document from DOLA that kind of gave us a breakdown where different rates were. I don't know if I could dig it out somewhere, but I thought we got something that showed sort of reporting from this DOLA or CML, where they reported a bunch of different Colorado communities reported back those numbers.
Yeah, Dave provided that the last working session that we went over.
And I mean, it's my understanding, like you compare apples to apples. I mean, is Fort Collins going from 42 MGD to 60 million gallons a day? Is that, I thought they were working on their intakes, but someone said they're almost increasing their capacity from like 40 plus to 60 plus million gallons a day.
Fred, I'm not that familiar with their project, so I couldn't answer what that is.
That's big, if it's true. But again, that's spread out over how many users, how many taps are in the Fort Collins Loveland Water District.
more than Wellington.
Yeah, huge, okay.
I don't have those numbers, Trustee Whitehouse, I'm sorry.
I appreciate all the data you've provided. There's a ton, so thank you very much. I don't have any other questions.
Anything else?
Thank you so much to the staff that went back and looked at that cash in lieu. I admittedly had a lot of heartburn over that market value formula that was previously used, and this looks like the number that was presented in the packet does not throw up the red flags that the initial valuation did. So thank you for taking the time to revisit that and take a second look, because we need to, we can't be unfair to our business community either. We need to be equally diligent about making sure that we're charging them fair and appropriate fees and not above or beyond what is necessary. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the hard work and staff put into this, because a lot of times you'll see communities put impact fees out to consultants for professional studies, and for our staff to be able to do this in-house, this is huge. This is a cost savings to our community, and it also showcases the amazing talent that we've brought in to be able to give us some solutions to help with these difficult problems. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee.
Yeah, in some of the conversations, it just feels to me that there's some confusion on where some of the monies are supposed to go and how they're supposed to be used. I was wondering if there was any way we could get something broke down and even get it publicized to the public to make it more understandable. So, water tap fee, what is that going to? Because when we were talking about the raw water, it almost felt to me like there was some thought that raw water fee could be used for infrastructure money, which my recollection and knowledge of that is it can't. It's a specific item that's used for a specific use, and you can't take that to subsidize something else. So I was just hoping that maybe we could get some clarification, because I know that there's a lot of that has floated around the public, wanting to take this money for this and that money for this. But the reality is that's not how it works, and that's not what we can do legally. So if there's some way, I know you're standing there, Cody, but I know this isn't your gig, but I'm sure Judy's listening, or Patty, somebody can do this. But I think it would be very helpful for folks to understand where the monies go and what they're legally used for, if we can get that out to the public and maybe even to the board, because I'm a little gray on what we can do where sometimes too. So that's my only comment.
Good one too. Thank you guys very much for all the work. Really appreciate you doing everything. It's going to take a big effort. Okay, just keep it up, everybody. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. We got something else. Number 4.
This
Draft.
one's
Huh?
sunshine and sparkles, right?
Yeah.
Kelly Houghtling's going to bring us sunshine and sparkles.
That's right. Something fun. Kelly, you on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you all see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, well, here's the Sunshine and Sparkles presentation, I suppose. I've never had that one before, but I appreciate it. So before you tonight is a review of the draft community survey. High level, this is something that we didn't initially have on our radar for this year, but there was an opportunity that was presented for us to be able to provide a survey to our residents at no cost to our residents either. So this is something that Ms. Garcia worked on and was able to secure a free community survey. So with that in mind, wanted to just quickly review the questions. If the board has any thoughts or feedback about what you would like to see in here, we can always modify and try to get something out here soon. So how this survey would work, some communities are mailed to your home. This is more of a text survey. So it will go to all registered voters in Wellington. And the goal is to get 400 completed surveys back. To make sure that it's a statistically valid survey, and that window of time would be about 10 to 14 days. So this is the initial question that you'll see of just an introductory statement. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be that point of contact for residents. The first question is just to verify that they are a resident. If they're not, then it will kick them out of the survey. Question 2 and 3 and 4 are ranking Wellington as a place to live, a place to raise a family, and a place to retire. I think this is really great baseline information. We talk about our values, that it's a great place to raise a family, and this is just to verify that. Should we ever want to do a survey like this in the future to compare baseline data moving forward? Question 5 is open-ended. And so this question is thinking about the next few years, what is one issue that you'd like the town to focus on? And this is just an open-ended text question so we can get some good information. And then this is more about commercial businesses and what residents would like to see. So it's more of a ranking system of what type of commercial businesses that you'd like to see within the town. Question 7 is focusing some data that might be helpful for the Community Activities Commission. So what is the preferred type of events that they would like to see in here so they can focus on their efforts? And we have an open text box if there's something that we hadn't thought of. Question 8 is to help our recreation and planning the activities that they provide. So it's more preferred activities in a ranked order so they can start working on programming for different age groups. Question 9 and 10 are also about programming and resources that we have at the library and just trying to help to see what are the preferred categories and interests that people might have that we can provide that. Question 11 is talking about water conservation. So are you currently doing anything to limit your indoor or outdoor use? This information will be helpful as we try to roll out our water conservation planning. Question 12 and 13 is about safety. So how safe do our residents feel during the day and how safe do they feel during the nighttime hours? Question 14 is just trying to find out what kind of information our residents would like to be informed about. Question 15 is about, do our residents have access to high-speed internet at their home? I know there's been a lot of questions about broadband, and hopefully this helps narrow that down a little bit. Question 16, if offered, would you use a regional bus system with service to neighboring northern Colorado communities? I think there's been just some question on if that's something our residents would be even interested in having. Question 17 is how likely are you to use the following methods of transportation? So we've got regards to the frequency of those transportation methods.
I read that and I'm like, before Kelly's like, yes, Patty, it happens in Wellington.
No, I have
by my house all the time.
Yes, I think it's something important for our community to note that we have ag routes, but we can, if you don't feel comfortable with that in there, we can always take it off.
I love it. It's great.
I think it makes us very unique, so.
Tractor.
And then question 18 is about the quality of customer service provided by town staff. Question 19 is to help us determine the preferred method of how our residents like to receive information. We certainly do all these things, but just want to narrow it down a little bit more of where we can focus efforts. Question 20 is ranking your level of satisfaction with the taste. Oh, there's a typo in there. Taste and odor of your water. So we'll get that corrected. The county has been talking a lot about access for affordable childcare, and so this would help us get some baseline data for Wellington if that's an issue that our community residents are facing. And then question 22 is a really big question. It's ranking our town services that we have and just trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. And then the next two questions are about speed of growth. The first one is about residential population, and the second one is about retail speed of growth. And then question 25, do you feel you have an opportunity to be heard and have a say in what happens in Wellington? And then the final questions are more just baseline information to get a sense of who is answering the questions. So I'll stop sharing. Does anyone have any questions or comments or any additional things you'd like to see on the survey?
What about question 28? You okay with everything there?
That's the last question.
No. Yeah.
I think that's appropriate. Well, I think it's appropriate too.
Okay, all right, I'm just saying. A lot of news out there these days.
I have, regarding the programming, a lot of the responses are very long. And I'm just curious for the mode of delivery, if those would be easily read. That's one of my feedback things I have. And then the other one I have, I'll just put them both out there right now, is a lot of these items that are establishing a baseline would then require yearly surveys in order to be valuable. So with that said, and I know that this one's free, I would like to make sure that we would consider doing this yearly so that we do have year-over-year data to compare against that baseline. Sorry.
Sounds good.
So most communities do this every 2 years. They take a rest year, and usually in a perfect world, we do this right after elections or right before elections. So that way we have some baseline data, we go into strategic planning and then budget. So there's kind of a process. This one in particular, the survey that we're doing this time does not show data from year to year changes or anything like that, and doesn't match us against any other municipalities. There are other surveys that do provide that, and maybe that's something that the town board talks about after this initial survey gets done. This survey came to us through Leah Johnson, actually, from the city of Loveland. When I worked with her, she gave our name to Magellan Surveys and said, why don't you give them a free one? And they're like, okay. So here we are.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if this is something that we want to do, that we do consider it, but for budget, whatever frequency is needed. But otherwise, I think all the question categories are spot on, exactly the kind of feedback we need from the community. So thank you. Well done.
Any other comments?
Overall, it's good. The only thing I would say is maybe consider adding right around 19, which is, I think it's great to have that and capture how people would like to be communicated, but also ask people, how are they currently receiving information? So ask how they're getting it now, and then, hey, what would your preference be? Because I think it's good to find out what they're doing, but then also let them know, hey, here are some ways you might be able to get information that you're not aware of. That's it. Other than that, I like it. It looks good.
So, I just had a comment. So this is going to be a text survey. Is it available on, would it be also available on the website, or did I misunderstand your statement, Ms. Houghteling?
Yes, it will also be, we'll send it out through the newsletter, social media. So there's other ways that you can take the survey, but we couldn't do a hard copy. We sort of could, but staff would have to code that data. So it's going to be a digital survey.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Looks good, Kelly.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for
Very
the
much.
sunshine and sparkles. I look forward to seeing
I
the
like-
results.
Look up, me too,
Mhm.
especially on our services.
So I have a question for you, Troy.
Yes, sir.
We had a programmable sign board that always ran out of fuel. Whatever happened to that?
I don't know.
Well, that sign, the sign died, and it did. And the parts are hard to come by. It was, when we bought it, it was a partnership acquisition, and it was a half a sign. We thought we were getting a bargain, and sometimes you get what you pay for, and we did with this, unfortunately. So
Okay.
it just,
I was just wondering.
Yeah.
So thank you for
I-
the
Well,
update.
we're applying for this big grant downtown. I think inside that comes with sign. You may not know all that. Okay.
Perhaps.
I don't remember that being added in, but anything's possible.
Okay, then. I don't have anything else. You guys good? All right, well,
Meeting.
productive meeting, big stuff, big stuff. I know it's difficult. This is gonna be difficult. We're gonna work through it. Okay? There's no really right answers, but we're gonna get there, okay? Everybody just stay with it. You know, it's a team effort, everybody. Thank you very much.
Yes.